Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube. It's super nice to have you here. I see that already 13 people. It's so wonderful to have you here. We're going to do something pretty cool because we're going to be, as well as doing our portrait sketches, which we all love doing, we're going to be doing some compositional master studies is the plan for today. Aha, some people waiting to get into Zoom. If you would like to, you will find a way. And I'm hoping Barbara has been my amazing support the past few live streams. Barbara, would you be happy to be co-host again? Cool, thank you so much. And so anyone who'd like to actually have a voice conversation, you can head over to Zoom, but I love having you here in the chat on YouTube as well, so you can let us know where you're joining from. And someone who in the live chat on YouTube says that they would like to win a sketch will win one of my sketches today. Hi Shannon, hi Janet, Zan, Barbara, Hilda. If you are in... So the thing with Zoom is the resolution is not as good, but we actually get to talk to each other. So you'll see the same thing as what you see on YouTube. But if you have both open, then please mute YouTube. And yeah, join the conversation or just hang out and don't talk. You know, you can do whatever you want to do. And it's nice having some friendly faces in the Zoom room to draw along with. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, and the cool thing about today, so this is it's a bit different to previous live streams where it's all been solely focused on portraiture pretty much. I was recently talking to my dad, who's a photographer, who taught me a lot about image making, and he recently dropped this name that was a great influence to him, which was Eugene Smith. And I started looking through his work, and I saw exactly some of the images. I'll bring one up because this was like this photo. I have seen my dad take kids' portraits like this, and there was a lot of other images, and he mentioned some others that he really loved. I'm going to show you some of that. There's so many amazing photos. We're not going to work from all of them, but I would really like to share a lot of them with you. And we can get into talking about composition and what we think makes a composition or an image strong. Because sometimes you have like a real a draw, or an image has some appeal, and you may not understand why you like it so much until you start to... Sometimes it helps just to draw it, and I'm just like, oh, this is here, and this is like interacting in this way. But here's really clear that we have this like really dark foreground, and there's a lovely light shape enveloping these two cute little people. And so this is a lovely composition. We're not going to draw from this one because I want to focus on... Oh, Terry has this photo hanging in your home. That's so cool. It is such a beautiful photo. Oh, that's amazing. So cool. So yeah, let's look at a few more of these. I'll start with the ones that we're not going to work from. But maybe we'll have to do a follow-up. And it's been really interesting getting into just learning a bit about this photographer and his work. And here he was like following a doctor on his visits. I think this is around the 1940s or so, on his house visits. And there's just some really wonderful kind of candid moments. And there's just the way he's documenting this kind of life and times. He did a lot of social, just highlighting kind of social stuff, and he also photographed in war zones, and a lot of really intense things that he was documenting through his work. And here's a couple from Spain. This is like the rural police in Spain. Amazing composition. We could get into so much on each one of these images, but I just want to go through a few just to give an impression, and then the ones we're going to draw from we can really dive into. And this was another one from from Spain, and this is super intense. And I read a really interesting article about this series of photos, where he was invited to a wake, and it was an interesting issue about the role of the photographer in an intimate event, and and the idea of like what we create and what we're doing when we're making images, and at what point, like the balance between being sensitive and capturing something which has potentially going to transport an important message to the world. So really interesting kind of discussion there, like some of the ethical kind of things of like when is it appropriate to photograph intimate moments and stuff. So pretty interesting, pretty amazing. And we're going to stick to our time limit somehow, because usually these are 10-minute portraits. And if you're sharing, you can use these hashtags here, Drawing with Dylan, 10-minute portrait, wherever you choose to share your work. And let's start looking at this image. This is Eugene Smith. And so yeah, I spend a lot of time just focusing on faces, but I really appreciate and love the composition, and there's something so brief and instantaneous that happens in photographic compositions, where it's just like the collection of every random thing that is right there in that moment. It's really, really interesting. And because we've got some like different format, here I am twice, hello. I'm doing some different stuff here because I want to do some like kind of landscape orientation. If you want to grab the reference images, I've put a Dropbox link, and you can head there to grab them so that you can see them a bit bigger, however it is that you're choosing to work. And if people know the work of Eugene Smith, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. And like Terry has one of these photos hanging at home, which is just so cool. And whatever you would like to say in the chat, please say things in the chat, because it's always great to have people just saying things and interacting. And I'm going to work with graphite, and I've got this smudgy blending stump, and I think I'll use this. It's a 6B Faber-Castell on Hahnemühle Nostalgie paper, and we'll get to it. Yeah, so this is kind of different to the way we usually do things, because the portrait here is quite small, and it's like a collection of interesting shapes, and we'll just kind of get into it and see what happens. Any questions or observations or impulse? Yeah, I'll just have a look. If I talk, and I look at the list here, maybe I will see. Okay. All right. Well. Okay. Feel free to speak, Zoom friends, if you feel like it. If you have something to say, that would be great. And let's get to it. Our sketch of Eugene Smith. And I wonder if my dad will watch this at some point and maybe even draw along. I'd love to hear from you, Dad, if you are watching and sketching with us. I'm sure you're asleep at the moment in Australia. But here we go. Let's do it. What do people already know about composition? Something interesting, like just the idea of like, I remember Rebecca Gay telling me just to draw a box on your paper, and then it's instantly, any drawing instantly becomes a composition, whatever it is, because it's not just reliant on the edges of the paper, it has its own kind of boundaries and you can even like break those boundaries, and then it also does interesting things with the composition. But there are some certain like a common rule that a lot of people know is the rule of thirds, and these different ways you kind of can break up and place things within a composition. I'd love to hear from you, Shannon, about your you're so glad we're talking about photography. Shannon is also a photographer and has worked professionally as a photographer, so I'd love to hear your input on the topic. And I don't think I'd seen this guy's work before either. And it's been, but when I started looking for it, I recognized some of the images. Some of them are super famous, really iconic. There's a series which I've just chosen not to work with today because you just got to make choices. But super powerful about a family and a region in Japan where a lot of people suffered from mercury poisoning, and a sickness an illness which resulted from mercury poisoning. And some of those images are just amazing. But I don't think I have any of them chosen today. But if you look into his work a bit, you'll definitely come across them. So this is, I think, really interesting, just having, like, the portrait is such a small part of this portrait. And a wonderful compositional tool is overlapping. And there are so many elements in the background which are overlapping each other, which just kind of clump together in interesting shapes. And before we even really register what those shapes are, there's just instantly this visual interest of like these pieces of paper on a pin-up board. And it's interesting, even though I don't consciously spend a lot of time like studying composition these days, I have in the past. I've done lots of master studies, and really there were key things that I learnt about guiding lines, overlapping, how to tighten an image. Sometimes I remember doing sketches where I'd have all these disparate elements and none of them are really interacting with each other, and that was something my mentorship with Rebecca gave, that she really was able to instill in me this idea of bringing things together and making the space that you have count for something, to be in service of the story of whatever is being told. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was great. Um, I was glad to be able to pass on some of that, because just learning, like, you can go along sketching, doing things, painting, spending hundreds of hours working on stuff, but sometimes it's just, there will be some key kind of aha moments where someone's like, oh, how about you do this because it will look a bit like this, and then you try it out and it's like, oh, and you start seeing it everywhere, like overlapping images, overlapping elements. Greg Manchess, a lot of his pieces, I can instantly think of paintings of his where it's like, oh, there are all these cool overlapping elements. Mike Mignola, big on abstract shapes and overlapping things. And yeah, Yeah, totally. And so that's a really cool observation, is how to keep there's all of this information in the background, and how to choose, is it in service of the portrait, or is the portrait in service of all this stuff in the background. And I think it's achieved really lovely with the photo, that the background is out of focus, so it's working with the depth of field, and the gaze is cast in this direction, and there's this really interesting shape which is kind of funneling out from the gaze, and then there's kind of this big dark shape in between, and then some stuff down here, but all of that's fairly out of focus, which this blending stump will be really good for pushing things out of focus. And yeah, choosing the focal point is a big part of the composition. Like, where do you want your viewer's eye to rest? And because James Gurney's done really wonderful studies on how viewers' eyes interact with the images which they are perceiving. James Gurney had some really awesome blog posts about that on the Gurney journey. And having lots of visual interest, things to look at, is really cool, because it gets you looking all over the place, but then there'll be elements which kind of bring you back around to where the main focus and intent of the image is. And I think it's really interesting thinking about intent, like, because on Thursday when we were talking to Ricardo, I was kind of like, I often don't feel like I have a lot of intent. I find an image that I love and I think is somehow compelling, and then I draw it. But without, it's just an interesting question. What is there intent in your work? What do you want the viewers to see or experience? And choosing where, like, the main focus is. There's like how much detail you have. So if there's more detail in the face, there's more to look at there, and it kind of keeps bringing you back to that. And how kind of, and I guess how blurry or how in focus it is kind of plays into that idea of how much detail there is. If it's crisp, like up in the face here, then there'll be, once the viewer's eye comes to rest and explore in the face, there'll be, in our last minute of drawing for this 10-minute sketch, feel free to keep working on these after. Now we're just going to kind of charge our way through a bunch of images which are all worthy of like hour-long studies. But just by choosing a few and going through it, I think we'll probably have seen and learnt a lot by the end of this session. And if it's monochromatic, also the the contrast, the value, the intensity, and your main heroic aspect, like the main event of the image. If there's more contrast, more definition, then that can... There's always exceptions to the rules, but that's kind of one way to think. Like if the highest contrast and highest detail is with where we want the focus to be, then... And that's kind of, I think, what's happening in this image, that... the face and the camera and the relationship between them, and knowing that photography, photojournalism was like the life, work, and passion of this person. That's kind of, we could make the camera a little crispier, a little more defined as well. Just thinking about that those are like, there's this relationship between the person and the camera. Um, oh, Kathy, can I talk about moving items around based in this photo? Um, it's interesting that I often work in like portrait orientation, and this if this were to be like a book cover or something, and it was a like portrait orientation, that all that stuff in the background, then maybe kind of want to kind of cram things in a bit closer behind, like crop in a bit closer towards the back of the head. So it totally depends on the format like you're working in, what the purpose of the image is, as to where and how you'd be like moving things around in the image. Hi Judy. Kathy knows nothing about composition. Happy about improvising with portraits and been trying different ideas for backgrounds. Yeah, cool. Really want the portraits to tell a story. Yeah, and that's something I feel like I don't do a lot in the background, although I feel like I have some kind of understanding of composition, and it's fun having extra elements in the composition to like tell a story. Yeah, I'm thinking about what it is that can be added, what else is in the image which kind of aids the story we're trying to tell. It's interesting. Let's move on to the next one. This is pretty cool. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but also squinting with black and white images, like squinting at something is a really like clear way to simplify the composition. There's this wonderful like subtle gradation from the darkness towards the light, and then the darkest part of the image is this this figure, and the tilt of it, like this could have been photographed just straight. I'll shrink this down. So like the photo could have been taken like this, but it's just like that. It's like just by tilting it and the arm reaching out, it's kind of like feels like it's almost falling towards the edge. I have no idea what this tunnel is, but it just gets you wondering, and kind of it feels like a very sci-fi kind of image. So let's do this one. I didn't really have the time to look into the backstory of all of these images, but if you feel like it, then go for it. If you'd like to learn some more. So this is interesting. This will be like, I've got this little figure here. I think this is the only one that we'll be doing that's not really a face. And I feel like this is a quite clear, it's kind of, I wonder if this is kind of working with the rule of thirds a bit. It's like figures over on the side, but yeah, just a really clear focal point and a really mysterious space that this figure is in. In the previous live stream where we worked from the book, the Underworld Mugshots of the Roaring Twenties, and when I was talking to, I think after that live stream I was talking to Dad, and talking about working from old photos, and he mentioned how he was really inspired by the work of this photographer. I was like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. And I think I asked last Saturday live stream as well if anyone had any suggestions of like specific photographers or people we could look into their work, and always looking for ideas for things to draw. And there are so many wonderful places to find inspiration and amazing reference and image. Cool. Julia Margaret Cameron. All right, I'll look her up. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, feel free to. So Julia Margaret Cameron and Joyce Tennyson. Also in the chat, if you have any suggestions, then let us know. So here I'm just like noticing all these leading lines, and that's part of like the amazing thing in this image. Like this, what even are these things? Look like shelves, but I don't know what the purpose of this space is. But they're all like pointing towards our figure, which really like draws us into that focal point. Very cool. Yeah, and it's, I wonder if that's something about the perspective, but there's something irregular to the positioning of them, and yeah, staggered is a nice description. I'm just gonna put this box around my drawing to get more. It's feeling a bit like too central in the paper for how it is compared to the photo. So just by enclosing the composition in that box, just instantly gives like a different kind of feeling of space. It totally changes the composition rather than just being drifting on the arbitrary kind of limits of the edge of the paper. It's kind of put it into a purposeful frame. And all these little supporting lines supporting these shelves or whatever it is that they are, they give it this really amazing like spiraling feeling. So what's everyone been up to today? We went picking strawberries. Harvard, Holly and myself today. That was nice. No, there are wild strawberries. They're very small and delicious. But there are a couple of farms around where strawberry is their jam. That's what they it's like all year long, just waiting. Oh, I can't wait to strawberry season again, because it's amazing when you go and pick them there. They just let you're allowed to eat as you pick, and like they don't weigh you, but they weigh the containers that you're filling into. But yeah, that would be interesting. How much they weigh before and after. Because I had Arvid and Holly with me. They didn't help much with what we ended up taking home, but they did definitely increase their body mass while we were out in the field. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And with Arvid, it wasn't even, there was none for the bucket, all for the mouth. Yeah. Holly kept coming back occasionally and putting something in the bucket, but Arvid was just like, nom nom nom. Steve McCurry has done amazing portraits. Oh yeah, right. Interesting. Yeah, that the Afghan girl. That's interesting. There's been a video where they found that woman again, super famous image. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting. There's a whole discussion about that image and like what there are all these different kind of layers to understanding and appreciating or questioning images, and like what are these images in service of. um, and it was interesting, there was something in Eugene Smith, an interview that he was in the 40s, he was photographing in Japan, and he was with the American forces in Japan, and yeah, must have seen a lot of intense stuff, and it sounded like that some of his decisions of like what to photograph, it's in some way it's like trying to show the reality of what's actually happening in a place, and I think there was something like he said, if a photo he makes can kind of contribute towards ending a conflict because people start to see it and start to realize what's actually happening, then it can play a pretty important role in yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that the comment there was that photography can show the humanity that we share, that's harder to look away from, more so than a news story. And also it's really interesting the power of composition, or of a crop can also it can be such a powerful part of the storytelling of what gets shown, what doesn't get shown. Can also totally be used in like a propagandizing kind of way. If you're like, look at this, but it's like, yeah, but if you look over there, it can actually be like that. So there's, yeah, it's just really interesting. Cool. All right, that was 10 minutes with this person staggering through this strange space. And if anyone can find out what we're actually looking at, or perhaps I will look it up when I have a moment to do so, to see what this space is, what this story is about. Pretty interesting. Karl von Fechten. Cool. Keep the suggestions coming. That's awesome. I really appreciate your input. This looks really yellow. That's a bit more how things look. A bit more like how it looks. All right, moving along. And as I mentioned earlier, if you would like to win one of my original sketches, let me know in the chat and perhaps you will win. I do this every time I do one of these multiple sketch live streams, I give away a sketch. And so there are quite a few of my sketches which have been given away, and they're around the world, which is wonderful. You got one. Okay, this one's pretty cool. It's another landscape one. Pretty amazing image. There's a few of this character. I just didn't have the time to look into the story behind these, but that's such an interesting thing about images, that they tell a story without knowing what the background story is, and they can really get you engaged and curious, and like, who is this person, and what is the context that this was taken in, and I think there were quite a few of this character, and I contemplated with this one, I thought about like just cropping it down to the focus, but it's such a powerful composition with the background, with this little barn there. And so much of that gets lost. Just talking about the power of cropping and how it can affect the storytelling. I thought if we had just gone down just into the portrait, the composition is just totally different. So it makes such a difference how our compositions are planned, where if we're focusing on portraits, where the portrait is located within the composition. It's really interesting. The barn is like pointing towards the head. I've got this mirror image down here, so but yeah, there's like this barn on the side, and it's just kind of like guiding towards the face, and the ridge of the mountain, like really close to the top of the head, but kind of enveloping the whole space. If that white hair had kind of popped out of the top edge of the mountains, that would be kind of lost into the air, but that way it's really kind of contained. Cool. Oppressive. The mountains are oppressive. Yeah, and it's just like pushing down. Yeah. Interesting. Let's draw. So on Thursday, Barbara would love to win. Cool. Thursday on Drawn Together, I'm going to start with this little barn here. Talking with Ricardo and about emotion in creative work, because we're talking about emotion in singing and how you can just with voice you can like put that emotion right into people and they can't get away from it, and it's such a powerful medium, music. And thinking back to the conversation with Camilo and about the emotion rather than like draftsmanship or whatever it is that we put into creating our images, that having it being in service of an emotion. And that was something Camilo talked about in music as well, that music just goes like has this incredible direct emotional effect on us. And so it's interesting doing this like composition study, that suggestion or observation that it's a bit oppressive, the way the mountain is like holding the top of the head, to look at bowing his head, yeah. And they can start to interpret all sorts of things into it. But just how can composition and supporting elements in an image contribute towards generating a sense of some emotion? And is that part of the intention in making our images? Because sometimes I think we just kind of go along making things, and then it's kind of like without intention. Sometimes we may end up creating something which may feel kind of light or oppressive, or without really understanding how. And it's interesting to think if there is the intention beforehand, like I want this image to communicate this sense, then to think that there are actually particular tools, that compositional tools, and also in the technique perhaps different tools that can be used to really help convey something in particular, which I think is not what I do most of the time. I find reference, which I think looks like it will be fun to draw, something that I can really kind of get into as I'm working with it. But I think I don't consciously think about the emotional aspect of it, and perhaps there is something tying them all together, which I'm not consciously choosing, but it's like there. But the idea of having the emotionality of a piece being kind of at the center I think is a really interesting thing to think about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That it could be a more commercial thing, or I guess it doesn't have to be, but it definitely is used like in the entertainment industry or advertising. Yeah, and yeah, yeah, it has. Yeah, yeah, and then what gets shown. Yeah, and it's interesting to think because a lot of things are created with an agenda, if they're commercial or if they are like in service of trying to communicate a particular message. Then things can be edited and used in a way which kind of will get the viewer kind of sympathizing in a certain way. Was it something like, yeah, yeah, can totally be accidental, or it can be really done with intent. And that's something like you were saying about with war correspondence, that it's can be very, very selective what is then shown, and that's something really interesting now that people. It used to be a much, I guess, in the past potentially there was a more focused lens of what gets shown, what gets communicated, and now online, everyone has a camera, and it's like everything from every side and too much, and it's all confusing, and it kind of from that overwhelming amount of information and emotional impulse, then it's really can be really like difficult to find validity in anything. Yeah, put the box around it to or a brand. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I was thinking about something like that today. That depending on our own kind of personal lens on the world, and what we take in. Um, oh, cool! Thank you, Matt. The photo of the man in the tunnel is called "Reign of Chemistry: Laundry Detergent Production, taken at Monsanto Corporation." Whoa, 1953. Thank you for that investigative journalism. Thank you for the collaborative effort finding out what that is. Thanks so much. Interesting. That's why he's staggering. It's like walking through a tunnel of chemicals. Whoa. Monsanto. Mm-hmm. No. Ah. Can't hold things with your right hand anymore. Yeah. When I got home from the first day of painting the mural, I had been had this special like mini bucket had this strap so I could hold it in my hand and I could like have my paint in there. And after the second day, I don't know how many hours of holding this bucket of paint and then riding home, and I sat down at home, my hand was just like shaking so much. And because I know, just not used to like for hours on end just to be holding something like that. All right, that's our 10 minutes with this person. Yeah, the hair. So there's so much to do here. And confining ourselves to this 10 minutes, then it's like, okay, I can't get lost in the hair. There's too much going on. And it's interesting within that time restraint, that we can start pushing ourselves to make quick decisions, which can then, like, we're kind of forced to choose, like, okay, what seems like the most important part of this? Like, what can I focus on? And the more you practice doing this, you kind of you practice kind of economizing it and making smart choices that are going to help the image without having to spend an hour just on the hair. And finding a way, like, how can I communicate what's going on in a really quick way without getting lost in the detail, because there's just not the time for it. And then if you do have the time and the luxury of kind of after these 10 minutes to spend more time on it, put a little box here, and then you can kind of return and be like, okay, what could really benefit from some more love and attention? What could aid the composition? Where do you want your focal point to be? And then you can really kind of strategically make decisions depending on how much time you have with any kind of chosen image. Hi Silke. Hi Julie. Walker Evans. It's great to look into. Farm Security Administration. Oh. All right. So I think now we will shift towards more portrait orientation, and so this I did read about here's Eugene Smith was getting around with these American soldiers in Japan in the Second World War, and they found this father with a child, and that's this moment. So I have kind of tightened this in a little bit. I'm going to shift over to portrait orientation a bit more because we have a really wonderful, clear portrait here. And I'm going to put myself back up in the corner. Hi. Have a little drink. How's everyone doing? Thank you for the photographer suggestions, everyone. And if you would like to win one of my sketches, say so in the chat, and you might. Okay. And I mentioned earlier, if you joined us late, you can find these reference images in a Dropbox link in the description. I might, because there's so much going on here, I don't usually do this kind of brief block-in stuff. Generally, I'll just like focus on an area and just expand from there, but just to kind of see if I can fit this on my paper, I'm just going to do this kind of brief block-in, because if I just started working on the face, and they'll be like, oh, it's things will just drift out of the composition perhaps. So I can just kind of find where I want to put things within my composition, which is different to the original photo, this way. So after picking strawberries, we went to a wonderful community brunch at the neighborhood where I did my first mural back in 2020. And there's a really lovely community center there, and I did a big group portrait, which has just recently been hung up on the community center building there. But I was there with my kids, so we were basically just hanging out in the sandpit and playing with kids and stuff. But it was really nice. And just thinking about war correspondence and war stuff, a lot of the people that have been at these events and that I've met are refugees and have moved to Germany, and it was really it was nice having the kids just play together. Like there was a family that we spent a bit of time with today who are originally from Iran and I guess fled to the Ukraine and then from Ukraine to Germany. So they've been displaced a couple times. Yeah, it's intense. And then you're there with these beautiful kids and just hanging out, playing in the sandpit together and getting their face painted, and it's really nice to see that in this neighborhood. There's a really that community center there, the Avel, is they do really wonderful work for the whole neighborhood. And yeah, looking into doing another mural there this year as well. So that neighborhood has a really interesting history, because it was there were barracks there which were refugees were housed there in the First World War, I think. So it was kind of like these makeshift houses, and then in the 60s they were all knocked down and apartment buildings were built. And now there's another phase of demolition and reconstruction, and just in a relatively short space of time this neighborhood has gone through a lot of transformation. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. Because before I did the mural project there, the first time I didn't even know the neighborhood. And just within this city of 150,000 people, it has its own kind of distinct history, which is pretty interesting. And originally, when it was these barracks were built there to house a lot of people, it was at the edge of town, and now it's kind of been, town has continued to grow around it, which is really interesting. So So looking into the composition, just thinking about like choosing the moment. It's interesting that here, like the child on the back is out of focus, and so the main focus is up towards the dad's face. Yeah, and the girl is like looking at the camera, and the dad's probably looking at a soldier. So yeah, she's really important. And I don't know, he's probably way more experienced than me, or perhaps it was the limitations of the lens, but sometimes I take photos and I'm like, oh, I wish that had been in focus and not that. Um, but I'm still learning. I think photography and drawing and painting are wonderfully complementary things to practice. Cool. Yeah, and there's cool. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, there's some really, like the whole history of psychological manipulation in advertising is pretty interesting, because there the way composition's used is really intended to make you feel a need and lack that can be filled by spending your money on that toothpaste or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very cool idea. Yeah, there would be so many things to go into that. Like, is it because it goes beyond even, like, yeah, so many elements can play a role in conveying any given emotion. Is it the subject matter, or is it the way it's represented? Like, just I was just thinking about Sina's work and how it's so like dreamy and soft, and there just the technique already conveys um, a whole kind of vibe. Yeah. And and in the cinema it's like 60 images a second, and that's the composition and the intention that's given to all of that. I just noticed, like, didn't get too much into the kind of surrounding stuff in the composition, but just this leg is like pointing right at this kid in the background here. That's interesting. And the way the like cloth of this figure here, there's this other leg here which is just kind of closing in the portrait here, and it's like putting these kind of dark confining forms that are keeping us focused on these faces. The way light and shadow is used, all the darkness underneath, which is kind of pushing up the whole angle of the arm and the shoulder pointing towards the face here. Like we're pointing down at this kid, the kid's looking at us, but the kid's kind of blurry, and then we look at the dad, and yeah, really interesting what's going on. And this arm's kind of pointing up as well. Pretty cool. Oh, how much was done in the darkroom? That's like a whole dimension, like an editing. Yeah. Dodging and burning. The darkroom, Photoshop references, it sounds like to me. But yeah, I guess it comes from the darkroom, right? Silke would like to win. Corinna would like to win. Lewis, maybe you just joined us. This is in Japan, not Vietnam, but it's interesting because they're like super famous. I was thinking about this famous image from Vietnam just like 15 minutes ago when talking about the way an image is cropped, what it tells and shows of the story, and how it kind of influences the viewer's perception of what's going on in the story. It's really interesting. All right. Let's do this freaky one. Whoa, what? Exactly. So this is just like a tiny bit of out of focus portrait, super crisp rat, which is in focus, but with the human figure being in this like hazmat suit. What's going on? What is the context and the story of this image? This incredible like light shape at the back of the head. Oh, there's so many shadow and light compositions going on. Don't look it up. Shannon doesn't want to know what's going on. Look it up after the live stream. But that's a cute rat. Is that from Pinky and the Brain? I loved Pinky and the Brain. They're just like whatever's going on in this image, there are just so many incredible like transitions, like super hard between light and shadow, and then super soft blurred forms, and just there's so much going on here. This was such an interesting image. Lewis would like to win. Good luck. This is your preferred image. Thank you so much, Lewis, for sharing that story. I loved how you took some of, I guess, your favorite images from what I shared and put them in there. It looked really cool. So let's do it. The entire square composition, I mentioned earlier, you can there's a Dropbox link in the description to get the complete images. So I've cropped this down a bit so it kind of fits in here, but that whole square image is really interesting. There's so much cool stuff going on. It's actually more landscape than square actually, but let's do it. This is really interesting how it's I let me know if you've ever heard me talking about abstract shapes before, just drawing abstract shapes, perceiving things as abstract shapes rather than what it is that those things represent. But this is like amazing. This head just has this kind of trash can cylinder shape, and like it's so clear that this is the head, but there's just like there's like no anatomy going on. Yeah, yeah. This oh, maybe I'll just do it. I'm just thinking, if this was like an illustration I was doing, I would make that rat much bigger and kind of push it into the foreground more. And Kathy asked earlier about how to change things in a composition. I think it's perfect in this photo how it is, and in a photo it's like capturing a moment with the specific lens that he would have been using, and but in illustration we can kind of take things, and I could bring that rat much more to the foreground. But it's also interesting that it's so small and like vulnerable. It's so small, but it is like what's in focus. Mm, yeah, yeah, it's really interesting, and there's such high contrast because there's the where you have the highest contrast is often like where you look, and that's where you have things like here on the phone. It's like the black and white of the countdown, the timer, the black and white of the eyes get us looking at people's eyes, and the the face of this observer here is really muted. It doesn't have any of that super bright highlight, whereas the rat is really bright, and the black eyes and the white fur is just really grabs the attention. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? What were some of the quotes? Oh yeah, it's like, I think so, Brain, but how are we going to teach a monkey to floss? And it'd be all these really nonsensical things. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, Pinky? I think so, Brain, but how are we going to teach a monkey to floss? Yeah, I loved Pink in the Brain. It's so cool. And this is like most of what's going on in this image is like right here between the two faces, but there's like everything that's going on in the greater composition is like all kind of in service of that, like pushing in towards that moment between these two faces. It's really cool. See how we go in the time limit, but really everything should be really kind of muted. Even like in this overall composition, even the highlight here on the face is really clear highlight. The highlight on the visor here is actually quite muted compared to the rat. So we kind of want to give attention and time to what's going on in the face, but then in the overall image to kind of like tone it back. See how we go. It'd be great to have some graphite dust to just really quickly kind of but with the blending stump, you can just put a lot of graphite down and then push it around. Flash Gordon. Yeah, it's so interesting, like what certain images, stylistic stuff, like there's this whole this world of association that it kind of conjures up. Something about the era and I don't work with an eraser a lot, but this piece would be really good for just like smudging everything, getting everything grey, and then picking out some kind of highlights with the eraser. That rat needs some more love, but we've still got a minute and a half, so it'll be okay. Sweet little rat. Interesting, the framing of the face. This frame within the frame of the composition. Pretty cool. You can have frames within frames within frames, which I guess is like happens a lot in comics. Yeah, oh, it's super cool. It's like there's a lot to be learnt and loved in comics. Okay, time's up. How are we doing? How are you all doing out there in the YouTube and in the Zoom room? We can look up Pink in the Brain quotes after this. That was fun. What a cool image. All right. Best one yet? Of yours? Cool. It was a fun one. It was really good. All right. I have 2 more images and they have multiple faces on them. So, Hilda, is it just me or does the person in the helmet look like a cat? That's a wonderful interpretation of this image. It's a cat, just call it a rat. So I was thinking for the next couple images that I have here, we'll spend a bit longer than 10 minutes because we've got multiple faces and it's like super complex. I'm just going to focus in on 2 faces in this one. And I wonder what is going on in this moment. It's so interesting. Like on a street corner, like all these people watching some procession and what is going on? Each face telling a different story. Amazing. Yeah. Clapping, crying, just really austere concern. So much going on. So for this one, I would love to draw so many of these faces. I've cropped it down to this, but the woman in the hat, it's like really amazing as well. What are we gonna do? So as I mentioned earlier, you can get the reference images at the link in the description. I'm going to shrink this down because I think those 3 faces together, the whole thing together, it almost hurts to edit these compositions because they're just so amazing. But we often you find when you have a really big complex composition, there are smaller compositions within the greater composition. So it's interesting looking at these little like a moment within a moment. But it does hurt a bit to crop it down because it's just so much cool stuff going on there. And maybe... Alright, okay, I'll keep it like this. And I'll give us a bit more time, maybe 20 minutes. And you can choose your moment. You can choose your faces that you want to work on with this one. And the final image we're going to work from is a much more complex composition. Ciao, Guru. But let's go for it. I'll put on 10 minutes and then 10 minutes again after that 10 minutes. And we'll see where we end up. It's tricky. So much to squeeze into this. So maybe kind of like just that central face could just spend the whole page just working on that face, but gonna have it pretty small on the page here. The black jackets of the 2 bracketing figures are really cool against the grey jacket of our foreground figure. How's everyone enjoying this compositional focus of this session? Yeah. consider. Yeah, to, like to get acquainted with the composition. Yeah. Feeling the burn. It's great. Mm. Yeah, I remember you saying that your students don't want a time limit in art because they always have time limits. But it's so beneficial. I've just benefited so much from working with time limits. And I wonder if there's some sneaky way you could just spring it on them. Yeah, it's cool, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I really no, no, go for it. I love when other people talk other than myself. What did you want to say? Surely helps. So a little piece of advice from Zoom: if you pull the same expression as the person you're drawing, it'll help you get it right. It wasn't exactly the phrasing, but it's. Does anyone find themselves pulling the same face as the person they're trying to draw? But yeah, it totally helps. Cool. I working with the time limit. I remember these moments um, before the first lockdown. I was doing some real world classes, and I had just started doing them, and they were so much fun. And it was kind of my vision was I was going to do a lot more of it, and then it all shifted to online, and so far has stayed there. Um, but I had this really cool space, and I taught a class that I called "Learn to See, Learn to Draw," but in German, Sehen lernen, zeichnen lernen. And I started with all these like soft things. It was a 6 week class, um, and then, and then I remember that I had one lesson about simplification, and I told them about squinting at your reference and stuff. And then I set up someone as a model, and there was like a Persian rug hanging behind them. There was like a vase with some leafy plant, and then and some of the people drawing were just like, there's too much going on. But it's interesting when there's so much going on that you just have to like filter out information. And if you do have a time limit, like to be like, okay, what am I even going to be able to do within this time frame, and to choose that thing. And I remember in the Tuesday sessions, and I think sometimes people will still do it, but there have been people who in the quick timed sketches would only do eyes, just focus on the eyes, just choose your moment, just do that. And I've really enjoyed that about timed sketching, that the way it kind of forces you to just choose something and do it without overthinking it. And the more you do it, you start to realize, okay, I could economize on that. That's not important. Like for example, the pinstripes on the jacket, that would be easy to put in there, but are they important? They could be at some point if we get down the expression on the faces, and then we feel like, oh, there's all this cool other like supporting visual information. What else can I add? And And if you grab the things that you feel like have the most impact, or just the things that you're drawn to most in the beginning, and that's kind of the way that I'll look at an image. Is like, people often ask, where do you start? Where do you even start when you've only got a minute or 6 minutes or 10? And just be like, whatever grabs my attention, and just kind of trust that that way of being like, okay, this is the thing that kind of grabs my attention. I'm just going to start there, and that will lead onto this. And sometimes I feel like I'm jumping around the face and the drawing, but basically just following that intuition of like, what's jumping out at me, what do I feel like is important to convey, or what's just caught my interest, and then how can I do it in a way which is going to be fitting to a limited time frame. For example, just like drawing no detail in the eyes, just a triangle, or just the triangle representing the shadow under the nose. Or as we keep practicing, we just keep learning ways to simplify things, which we can then expand upon when we have more time. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's wonderful drawing from your imagination. Um, and so this is just in reference to high school art students. And that they tend to draw from their imagination, which is super cool. Um, but yeah, at some point there's like, I've noticed when I've also done some drawing with young people, and they'll draw from their imagination, but they'll often, or the people that I was working with, that there'll be some kind of discontent that like, that's not how it actually looks, but they're not actually looking at the thing that they're trying to draw. They'll like look at it and then just draw. And it's being able to nurture both of those kind of abilities, to just go from your imagination, but also to carefully look at things. Like, both of them are really cool things, cool skills to have. Okay. Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that was 10 minutes. I'm going to put another 10 minutes on. And here I've focused on getting shapes and lines, and now I can start to get into the values a bit. Some shading and um, yeah. And that's a really interesting thing. So that you're drawing a tilted, twisted head, but then because you know that a face actually looks like this frontally, that instead of it drawing it like that, you draw it how you think it is. Um, yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and that's interesting because I just noticed here that I had the ear drawn up here because I kind of had this idea that ears often kind of have some kind of alignment with the eye, but because of the angle of this shot, like the ear is much lower, and I just noticed like, oh, I actually put it up here, but it's, if I really look at it, it's more like down here. Yeah, and catching those. Yeah. Who else did that? Yeah, and it's learning to like catch those things. Um, if we want it to look like the subject that we're drawing. Don't let the autocorrect of our drawing brain change what's actually there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really interesting. Like if you spend an hour on one drawing, um, and at the end of that hour you're like, this is not working, or you do 10 6-minute drawings, and like a bunch of them you might be like, meh, but there could be something in one of them, or maybe even a couple of them, where you're like, oh, there's some kind of life to that, and that balance of spending, like dedicating time to a piece, which is a wonderful thing to do. But I just in my experience, I think doing a lot of quick stuff, then you accumulate such a kind of wealth of experience of drawing different things, drawing different faces in different positions, and you kind of visual library or memory just grows much quicker than when you spend a lot of time on each piece. And that's another thing where it's like it's good to have both, I think. Yeah. I wonder if the students are so resistant to doing timed drawing. Yeah, if you can just kind of like spring it on them. If you get everyone drawing from the same reference, and like the reference is up the front, this is going to be an exercise in looking over there and then translating it to the paper, but you've got to look a lot, and at some point you're just like whoosh, you pull it down and there's something else, and then they look up and like, what? And then it's like, oh, now do this one. Yeah. Yeah, and just keep changing the reference. And something that I'm pretty sure it was Richard Schmidt, who I've quoted it a few times. I've got his book here somewhere, Alla Prima, Everything I Know About Painting. And there's something he said that at any moment being able to say it's finished and walk away, whether you've spent 5 minutes or 5 hours. And that was something which I think was really transformative for me, to be like, oh, like here, the 10 minutes that we started with, like that could have been just a finished line work drawing. It's like, oh, then we add some more time and then try and get it to a next level of finish. And the idea that something can be finished in 5 minutes, that for some reason we think, we need to spend a month on a painting or whatever. Or I used to think that. But then to realize sometimes the things that I spent a month working on, I don't enjoy more than some of the things I spent 6 minutes working on. So what's the what's the balance? What's that? Yeah, return on investment. And at some point I think all of this time sketching, in some way it's going towards when I do spend more time on something, I have like a different approach and trying to capture some of that life of the brief, quick start, and to keep that kind of alive throughout the piece, which is often challenging because then it can get kind of bogged down and yeah, and just finding the balance of like what works, what's enjoyable, what works as an image, what's fun to do, what are you doing it for? There are all these different kind of considerations at play. I haven't even looked at the background. Just noticed there's this rectangle of a window, which is just a cool shape, which is giving that definition to the edge of the head. There's just, if we expand our focus, zoom out a bit, start to see all these other interesting things going on, and if this were to be the beginning of a 1 hour session, then maybe we would start to introduce different parts for each kind of pass, each layer of attention that we add to the initial kind of dynamic start, that we can keep kind of building upon it. Got a minute left. Kind of bring some definition and focus back to the main figure here. I don't get the almost crying vibe from my drawing, like in the reference image, but there's a lot of expression in the face that I like. Okay. So we have one more image which we can spend at least 20 minutes on, because it's got like, the crop that I've chosen has like 5 faces in it or something. How's everyone doing? Still 19 of you here. Awesome. Yeah, this is fun. Okay. So one more image. And I mentioned earlier there was this one scene. So there's a series in Western Spain, and so there were quite a few. So this was like the rural police in Spain, and this is a mother taking their daughter to their first communion, and so I'm not sure exactly. I don't know when was the. I don't know heaps about the history of Spain, like fairly recent history, but like around the 40s, what was going on in Spain. And then, so someone, which I presume is this man standing at the front, had helped Eugene Smith with something, and then he saw him the next day, and he's like, "Oh, my father has died. Could you come to his funeral, his wake?" And then when he was there, he asked if it would be okay to take photos, and he said he would be honoured. And that was the question that was put to the photographer, like how can you impose your photographer self into such an intimate family moment. And the image that we're going to draw from, I've cropped it a bit, but this is the whole image, and it's such a intense, powerful image. And I'm going to crop it down to here. But yeah, that to be present in that time of mourning and such an intimate family space, and to be there as like an outsider, as the photographer, and capture this image, which is like to think that this is from Spain in the 40s, less than 100 years ago. It's, for me, it seems like it's from another world. But for many people, that would be like the civil guards. Yeah, Lewis will know perhaps about the history of Spain in the 40s. You can fill us in. 40s, 50s. Thank you, Julie, for your suggestion. Joseph and Penty. I'll definitely look into them. Yeah, so that was a really interesting, specifically in relation to this image, and there are a lot of other, if you look into the work of Eugene Smith, you'll find a lot of other really like intense images. And yeah, and it's interesting, like the role of the photographer within this thing, and that's something that I often feel conflicted about. Like, I love taking photos, but then it's like, do I have a place in this moment to be taking a photo, like to be there with a lens rather than just to be present in the moment, or like taking the thoughts of other people into consideration, or like what is it in service of? If it's just like grabbing as many images as you can without any kind of purpose, then it could be, you could get better at taking photos, but what is it kind of in service of? I think it's really interesting. And then in image making in a broader sense as well, like for what we do, what do we communicate? The moments that we choose to share and portray, like what is it? What attracts us to want to create it or replicate something? And what is it that we are like kind of sharing and communicating with the world? Kind of let me know what you think about those thoughts and contemplations. And we'll start drawing these 5 faces and hands in the foreground if you feel like it. I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to put the timer on 20 minutes and just kind of see what happens. Have a little drink. Yeah. Thanks for joining, Judy. Are you interested in winning one of these sketches? Have you said in the chat that you would like to win? Everyone who is watching right now, you have a 1 in 19 chance of winning. 20 people here now. A 1 in 20 chance. If you say in the chat that you would like to win, you might win. and I will send a sketch to anywhere in the world that has a postal address. So there's, so much going on. It's such a moving image, and so much to look at. If you are sharing online anywhere, I'd love you to use these hashtags here, Drawing with Dylan, a 10-minute portrait, and tag me. That would be cool. I'd love to see what you've been doing. And if you share to your stories and tag me in your stories, it's super easy for me to share that to my stories. And if anyone would like to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. Or if you're interested in monthly tutorials, I have a Patreon with a link is also in the description, where I've got now a couple years worth of monthly tutorials that you can, if you check that out, you will instantly have access to all of them. And I'm always wondering, what do I have to say? What can I teach? What can I share? And some people have had specific challenges and requests that they've asked me to address in my tutorials, and I really like kind of diving into whatever can be of help and interest to you. So if you do have any specific requests, let me know. And yeah, you can check out that at the Patreon link in the description of the video. And thank you to those of you who are here, who are already Patreon supporters. It's awesome. This is really interesting. I know some people who are intimidated by drawing hands, and the hands are like so expressive in this. And the interaction, hands on shoulders, hands on a face, the folded hands in the foreground, and hands, they are like, if each face is like an actor in the play, in the scene, like each hand is also can tell as much as a story as the face. So hands are tricky and challenging, but definitely worth dedicating some time to, because they can, if we're looking at storytelling and composition, then the hands are just so expressive. There is a lot of black. So the way I'm looking at this is I'm kind of going around looking at like what are the lighter shapes. I will get my blending stump and go everywhere apart from those shapes where I've decided, okay, there's like highlight here. So there is a lot of black to get done in a very short space of time. If I was inking this, I'd just go in with the brush and be like, that would go pretty quick. But I've really come to love the blending stump with graphite. It's such a cool tool for filling large spaces. It won't be super dark, but sometimes I feel like the grayness of it is also really interesting. Roseanne, he's one of your favorite photographers. That's cool. I'll just put these hands in the foreground. I don't know if I'm really going to have the time to kind of delve into them, but they're really key. Although I've cropped the image, it's kind of, yeah, it's always interesting to think what is the composition, what is the image about? Is it all about those hands? These people wouldn't be there if it weren't for the hands, but then it's also all about each individual face and hand and the kind of a relationship between each of them. Julie, you haven't said it, but of course you would like to win. That's wonderful. You just need to say it and it may come true. If you do put down a lot of black, a lot of graphite, also need to be considerate of where you put your hand when you continue working on it. So now I'm thinking I'm going to put it down just to establish some kind of value structure. So I'm going to put all this in, but then it's going to be like, okay, what do I do when I want to keep working on here, because I'm not going to be able to rest on the paper so much. But then you can like sometimes rest on an arm or find ways around so you don't smudge everything. So each, just the way each face, they're all in a different perspective and they're all kind of held differently within the composition. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I know from taking photos myself that sometimes, like, just the way you move around the subject or find an angle. I have specific photos that I can instantly come to mind when I think the first shot I took, I just stood and took it and was like, oh, this is a nice moment. That's a boring image. And I was like, what if I go over here? And it's like, oh, what if I go over here? And then you can see in the progression of the photos how I changed my location in relationship to the things. Because usually it's like, I want to take a photo because there's something interesting or moving that's happening in that scene, or like a nice moment. But then sometimes you create an image and it's just a boring image. And then it's like, what's... I don't know. It can also just be fun to have happy snaps. But if... I would kind of like the images to be... have some kind of stylistic consideration and be visually interesting, as well as just catching a family moment or whatever. And sometimes when you move around a scene, that things can come into alignment in a certain way, which you like couldn't have imagined if you were just only looking at it from that first perspective. And that can be really amazing to see the way things kind of fall into place. And I think back in the day when these film photographers, I know there are people working with film now as well, but digital photography has just made the whole medium much more accessible, because you can like take 100 photos, and if a couple of them are good, then that's good. But back in the day it would have cost a lot if 98 photos of 100 were rubbish. yeah, so I wonder like how it would have been, like the learning experience back then, and even for my dad, who he kind of I guess the digital revolution was difficult for him and his work. He was working on large format film, Hasselblad, and kind of didn't. I guess it took a while before digital cameras kind of were as good, and if yeah, I don't know, as good as an analog camera, but I guess it depends on how it's used. It can have some super low res images which are still really moving, and but one of his earliest photos that I remember seeing, my dad's, was at a scouts gathering, and so he must have been like, he wasn't, I don't know, 12 or something, and he had a camera, and what's it called, Scouts Jamboree or something, where hundreds of little kids get together and do scout things. But I don't know, like how much would it have cost back then to develop a roll of film? I just heard recently that from Luke in Antwerp that it costs like £20 in England to develop a roll of film. Now, yeah. Is there anyone watching at the moment who has who shoots with film and can tell us how expensive the hobby, the passion, the creative pursuit is? Ayeta, I'm glad you're enjoying the evening. I'm having a lot of fun with you all and with these images. I feel like I'm learning a lot. It's so rewarding doing like master studies, and looking, like every time we do these live streams and we're doing portraits, it's always learning about different images and what I personally like about images, what draws me to draw a certain image, why do I want to work from particular reference. But this is I feel like this is really special and really different, with the focus on like a broader sense of composition rather than individual faces. My pleasure. I'm glad you're here. All right. So now, like 15 minutes in, I feel like we've kind of dulled everything that's not really bright. And even some of these bright things could be a bit light, bit darker. And with that remaining time, can just kind of choose what's the moment, which face or what in particular we want to. Could just be spend it with the hands, but at the moment I feel like drawn to this central face. If anyone joined late in the game and you would like to go back and redo any of this, or spend more time with any of these, the reference images are all available via a Dropbox link in the description. And I greatly appreciate the work of Eugene Smith, and I don't own the rights to any of these images, and I I don't really understand how it all works online, because you can kind of see things all over the place anyway. But none of this belongs to me. But as a tool for study, I am very thankful and appreciative of being able to access these images. I was just thinking about our relationship to grief and mourning. And Arvid, who is 7 years old, recently he's been like, was saying to Kira yesterday, I think, it's like, I don't want you to ever die. And recently, Easter on Good Friday, which is called Karfreitag in German, he was like, I hate Good Friday. And it's like, why? And it's like, because Jesus died. It's like, oh, well, actually, in the whole big picture of things, that's supposed to be a good thing. And everyone's got to die sometime. And he was like, everyone's got to die on Good Friday? It's like, no, not all on Good Friday. But he was just sitting at the table this week one day, and he was like, meine letzte Aufgabe wird sterben sein. Which is like, my last task will be to die. And and I was like, oh, but how do you know that that's the last thing you're going to do? He's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, no one knows what happens then. No one can tell us. But it's just really interesting. He's a thinker. He has a real kind of yearning to understand things, and so far I haven't noticed the other two being as interested in death. We have a really cool picture book called Enter Tod und Tulpe from Wolf Erlbruch, which deals with death in a really beautiful manner. It's a really cool picture book, and something that we've often read with the kids. Beautifully illustrated, and I feel like it's quite just a nice kind of sensitive look at death. Yeah, and that's really interesting with this image and what we're talking about in the beginning as we kind of got into this one about choosing to share this moment or to be present, or what is it that's being shared with this. And it's such a universal human experience, isn't it? Yeah. All right, so that was our 20 minutes, and I'm kind of surprised by what's going on. And before I started this one, because it was so different to past live streams where it's just been faces, like individual portraits, and I was kind of like, oh, how's this even going to work out? And then with different orientation with some of the images, and yeah, but I think it worked out okay. I'm going to look back through all of the drawings that I've done right now. If you're in Zoom, it's in high resolution, I think, but it still looks like pretty low resolution to me. I will share these on Instagram as well, so you'll be able to see things a bit crispier. But I'll have a look now over here. And I would love to know from you in Zoom or in the chat if you've been drawing along the whole time, like what you've got out of this. I've really enjoyed it. If you had any favorite pieces, any favorite compositions, things that really worked for you or were especially challenging, because I feel like it's really informative for all of us to kind of be aware of, like, in our own process, what things, where's like the growing edge, like where are we learning, and what's, like, each time we sit together and we draw or sit alone and draw, what is it that's kind of taking place within the collective body of our experience? Like, what are we refining? What are we realizing we don't really like so much? Or what is there something that was like, oh, that was so cool, and from now on I only want to draw people in hazmat suits? Maybe there's some interesting moment that you've had today. That was... Yeah. That's okay for the first one to make zero sense, and it's really cool if they started to make more sense as things progressed. So that was really interesting. Thanks again to Matt who looked up what this image was. A Monsanto chemical laundry powder production. But yeah, going back to that was also, the first image was just a super complex image, and it was really interesting. It's fun to start with something really hard, because from then on you can kind of, if you start with something overwhelming, everything in comparison is kind of relaxing. You can relax into it. But yeah, that was the background element. All of these shapes where there's no specific detail in any of them. I feel like all of these I could go back to and kind of work on the contrast a bit more, add more value, which would really kind of push things in the composition even more. But it was really fun just to do this quick jump in to these. So yeah, there was so many cool images. Thank you, W. Eugene Smith, for your life's work and photographing all of these interesting moments and places. So for those who didn't catch it, I think most of these were taken in like the 40s, 1940s. So it's like 80 years ago. Yeah, that was it for today. I will go through the chat after this and see who said they'd like to win. And I make my little spreadsheet, and then I'll find on random.org who wins, and I'll let you know. And thank you all for being here. So make sure you're in touch with me on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, that would be amazing. And if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I'd love you to, because I do these sessions every 2 weeks, and not every Thursday, but many Thursdays, we have a drawn together session where we hang out and do a long format portrait with a guest. This was Ricardo, my Ricardo piece that I did on Thursday. And Shannon and I host these sessions together, and they are so much fun. And we really get to know some amazing people in more depth than we otherwise would be able to. And we've had 22 episodes so far, and they're all available to watch if you want to spend more time, which I think is a really lovely compliment to doing these time portraits, rather than spending 10 minutes on an image or 20, to potentially spend 2 hours working on one piece, and then to see how we can take what we learn in those short poses and bring them to something more in-depth and involved. So it's lots of fun. Plenty of opportunities to draw together. Also, every Tuesday I have a live Zoom sketch session, which everyone is welcome to join. And I think that's it for today. So where am I? How many times am I here? Here I am. Thank you so much for being here. It was a cool session. Thank you, Lewis, Silke, Julie, Jette, Annie, all of you. And special thanks to the people in Zoom. It's really nice just hanging out and spending time together. And I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday. And I look forward to next time drawing together. And I will say goodbye on YouTube, and then also be on Zoom for a little bit. And yeah, take care. Hi Zoomers.